Hello and welcome to the Thursday episode of the 905er and this week's 905 Roundup. My name is Roland Tanner.
I am Joel McLeod.
And, we have a couple of stories, as always, on a Thursday. And, the first one, Joel, is certainly, if you live in Burlington, this has been the main topic of discussion, and it's not the municipal election, although it has bearing possibly on the municipal election, but it's a different kind of a beast of a different color, I guess. I don't know if that's the right way to describe it.
A furrier one. If you longtime listeners of this podcast will know that we've mentioned this a couple episodes ago, so I guess you don't have to be that long of a listener. But coyotes in Burlington have been the main news. A main concern in Burlington for the last. If you read the papers, you're going to think, oh, it's only been an issue for the last couple of months. In reality, you and I both know this has been going on for years, almost close to a decade now. I think of concerns about wild coyotes in urban neighborhoods here in Burlington, and I'm sure other neighborhoods in the 905 as well. This isn't just a Burlington problem, but it's ballooned up because these. Coyotes have, long story short, basically attacked people minding their own business who were not pestering these coyotes, who were not bothering them, but the coyotes are so desensitized to humans that they feel comfortable going right up to people as they sleep and start biting them, either wanting to eat them or to demand a food from them. Basically, it's been these coyotes are so used to humans that we no longer really pose a threat to them. They're not afraid of us anymore. And we've mentioned this all this before, and I know listeners are probably saying, "What's the point, Joel? Get to the point." And the point is this: there's a website called Coyote Watch Canada.com. We're going to post a link to this particular article in our show notes. But on September 21st, they wrote in a blog titled "Wildlife Encounters Are Preventable If Timely Action is Taken." I'm not going to read it word for word, but the gist is this. I'm going to quote this. As far back as 2014, Coyote Watch Canada contacted the City of Burlington about issues related to wildlife feeding, attractants, and preventing negative encounters for residents. Hundreds of field investigation and mitigation hours exposed multi-site wildlife feeding, but the city took no action to resolve these locations. Many of these locations are still hotspots today. Flash forward to later on in the blog post, in a 2018 letter to council, it was noted that squirrels, chipmunks, waterfowl, and other animals, all of whom typically keep their distance from humans, were following residents in parks. That this behavior was also taught to coyotes is of no surprise. It was entirely preventable. Basically, they're saying that this not-for-profit agency that is granted concerned with conservation efforts for coyote wildlife, basically saying, like, you need to address this. Like bad things are going to happen if you do not properly educate people now on how to live with coyotes. And right now, for Burlington, the city of Burlington has said they've killed 4 coyotes to date. The problem is always that we were told at the start, like, there's no point in killing a coyote because another coyote will just move in and take that coyote's habitat. So this idea, the city's doing something, they've been forced to kill these coyotes. Have we solved the ultimate problem? I'm going to say no, because my suspicion is another coyote is going to move into those 4 coyotes' habitats, and we're going to be right back where we started on this problem, folks.
Back where we started, or even worse. I mean, again with this website, it seems to me, we haven't spoken to the authors of the website, but it seems to me to be written by people who are pretty darn well informed. It's well written. It's not inflammatory. It doesn't strike me as written by people with who are willing to let their willing to not let facts get in the way of their agenda, if you see what I mean. It seems to be a well-informed, well-written thing. I don't know if that means it's accurate or not, but it certainly struck us as, well, this is very interesting. And actually, the thing I found really interesting is who and what they don't blame. because those are the things that the city's been blaming and kind of shaming tacitly or not so tacitly last few years, which is, basically, oh, well, the citizens aren't putting out their garbage in the right way or at the right times, bird feeders and back gardens, things like this. There's no mention of that. They're talking about feeding in parks, and specifically a presumably small number of people in the city who actually feed the coyotes. These are things which are obviously it's not the city's fault that there are people who do things like that, but it is the city's fault that there isn't better education and enforcement surrounding not feeding wildlife. When I was a kid, I used to throw bread for the ducks. I didn't know there was anything wrong with that, but there are, wildlife experts will tell you that actually that's a pretty terrible thing to do. It doesn't do them any favors. There are signs in LaSalle Park saying don't feed the ducks, but unless there's enforcement, and also not just enforcement, but explanation to people about why you don't want to be feeding the ducks or the geese or the whatever, people aren't going to pay any attention because they're like, well, we've always fed the geese. What the hell is the problem? We all know that kind of reaction. We all feel it ourselves in our guts when we hear something we've done for a long time is challenged. A natural reaction is to say, oh, leave me alone. But if there are good arguments, and if the end result of this kind of behaviour is people getting bitten by coyotes, then I'll listen and I'll change my behaviour. But that education's never been done in Burlington, and so I thought that the story that they're telling is substantially different from the story we get from the city. I mean, ultimately, the parts about the city was the one that was saying shooting coyotes is a waste of time, and I'm sure they're right. It is a waste of time. Now they've been forced into a situation where they have to do it because the public is not going to accept much else. And because you've got a short-term crisis where, I think everybody assumed that, well, if the odd lapdog out for a nighttime pee gets eaten by a coyote, it's a shame, but what are you going to do? And I know I've spoken to people personally who that happened to, and I spoke to politicians about, well, this happened to, they're very upset. And literally the kind of reaction was an eye roll of, well, what do you expect if you let your dog out late at night? Well, not very sympathetic, but anyway. We're in this situation now because they kind of shrugged and said, well, basically this is the public's fault. What are we going to do? We're just going to say that the public are morons, not in so many words, but basically quite a strong implication that the public are morons. They shouldn't do it. You're naughty. But if you don't change your behavior, this is what's going to happen. And that's like, well, that's a very negative view of what your role is as city enforcement, But of course, it costs money to do the things that would have needed to be done.
What it comes down to here is that you to educate the public, change their behavior, and get them on board. It's going to require money and a campaign and strong messaging, and that requires time and resources. And it's very clear the city just said, we don't want to do it. We don't want to do it. It's somebody else's problem. Forget it. And it's one of those things like, you're going to discomfort some people. And it was almost as if the city was like, okay, do we discomfort the old busybodies who are going to call, like you said, I always am able to feed the ducks in the park. Why am I not able to feed the ducks anymore? You guys are crazy. And instead of taking on them and saying, no, like the problem is you train these animals to follow humans around. You're going to train coyotes to do the same. And they are a lot bigger than cute, fuzzy squirrels. And what it also would mean is eventually at some point, you might have to get police, bylaw officers to start issuing tickets and fines to people. Say, listen, you're feeding animals in a public park. Stop it. Here's your ticket, and make an example out of somebody. And that's what it would come down to. And somebody said, I just don't want to deal with the fight. And now we're stuck with coyotes attacking people. We're thankful that I'm personally thankful. Okay, we haven't heard anything of like a small child being really attacked, because that's ultimately what I'd be afraid of. Is that a new family taking a baby out to a park,
The children have been involved in some of these incidents. Yeah, I mean, I don't have the details to hand right this second, but
Right.
there was an elderly lady, but there was a child involved in at least one of the incidents as well. But yeah, I mean, it's a really bad situation that we've got now, and it makes everything worse because now the public is the anxiety that existed before, which I saw, when I was knocking on doors 4 years ago. One of the most, right up there amongst the things I heard all the time is like, what are you going to do about these? I see coyotes all the time. What are you going to do about it? And it was the most difficult thing for me to answer because it's like, I don't know what I mean. I'm told, I have been informed the best thing to do is kind of not very much. Well, maybe that was a crummy answer in retrospect, and I'll plead guilty to that. But that was what was coming out of the city, and I certainly, if the alternative was putting a bullet through sort of animals' heads for no particularly good reason, I wasn't going to be on board for that. But yeah, I mean, it's a really poor show. And I mean, the thing is, at this kind of time, and it's not necessarily a thing in Burlington, but it's certainly a thing in some cities. Election time, municipal election time, there are people running for a re-election talking about crime waves and funding the police. And Ron Starr, hilariously, the councillor in Mississauga, who it is alleged vandalized a car multiple times, has a huge billboard up saying, let's stop the crime wave. And it's like, well, there's one way to stop one crime wave. That's not to vote for you, mate. But yeah, and that's the kind of thing that comes up. What they never talk about is bylaw enforcement, which is what the city is uniquely involved in, which is enforcement of those little niggling things, that the police aren't going to touch with a barge pole, but which have to be enforced. That you don't grow the wrong kind, something poisonous in your garden, or you don't. But bylaw is a complaint-based system almost entirely. So if someone's feeding coyotes, unless someone else notices and reports that to the bylaw enforcement, nothing is ever going to happen.
It's a thing that what it comes down to in my mind is that the city is, and I think this isn't a Burlington thing. This is the 905. Is that for too long, every municipality has operated in their own private silos. Development and climate change weren't connected. Climate change and wildlife and park weren't connected. And what we had here was every municipality in the 905 passed a climate emergency bill, climate emergency bylaw, whatever, in their respective communities. And you say, okay, that must mean that, we're going to see massive policy changes to address this global emergency. We've seen nothing. In Burlington, development has still gone on the way it has been for the last decade. We haven't seen changes to the way buildings have been built or density or anything like that. It's nothing's changed. The reason why coyotes are here is because we never properly addressed sprawl, and we just kept saying, okay, there's another field, let's build a neighborhood. That's another field, we'll keep building. Oh, well, 407. Oh, let's go past the 407 now. And we ended up with, we've encroached on their territory, and they're wild animals. They aren't going to say, oh, well, I guess it's your land now. No, they will just travel down the ravines, travel down side streets, and this is their home now because we were greedy and we just said we're not going to change our way. Well, this is when nature fights back. This is climate change. We didn't address climate change properly. We didn't want to change our habits and our beliefs. Guess what? This is, we've seen Hurricane Fiona on the East Coast pummeling the Maritimes because of climate change. I'm not comparing the devastation to it, but this is kind of the same broad sense here, is that nature will push back on us. We are not the absolute masters of this planet. Even in the 905, we need to learn to live in our ecosystem, in our habitats. We pushed in on their territory. They're coming into ours. They're here to stay. Unfortunately, that's it. We are not getting rid of the coyotes. And I'm sorry, but if that's the case, then we need leadership who's going to say, then we have to change our ways. We have to change our habits. And if it's the people who can't change, who aren't adaptable to the new reality, are going to sit there and say they're okay with kids and old people being attacked because they find it's an inconvenience to change their habits. Tough. Like, we need leadership who'll stand up and say, no, we're taking a hard stance. That you need to change, or we're going to change it for you.
That's that's all very good points. I mean, that's a big macro, big picture thing. I'm going to bring it back briefly to the very small picture of Burlington, and that is that. But Burlington just has this habit. I don't know if it's getting worse. I'm not going to point the finger at this council. I'm not going to point a picture at any council. I'm going to point a picture at the bureaucracy of Burlington over the last decade and a half, and the culture that I've seen multiple times in action at City Hall. And again, it's not one person; it's a kind of institutional inertia. I think it's common at many city halls. I just happen to think Burlington has it bad, and it's kind of typical. The tone coming out of City Hall throughout this was there was an element of contempt for the public, and sure, members of the public may be ultimately responsible for this thing, because they're behaving in a really stupid manner and feeding dangerous wild animals. However, it's not helpful to just say, well, you know what, the public is stupid. What are you going to do? No, there's, when I say inertia, there are sort of multiple kinds of inertia at City Hall. There's that inertia that no department really wants to do anything if they can get away with it. They want to be left alone to run their little fiefdom in peace. And when councillors or the public or anybody comes to them and says, we want this to be done differently, the reaction, whether it's Cam Jackson 15 years ago or Marion Mead Ward today, or any a councillor X or councillor Y or member of the public A or member of the public B, is, you don't know what you're talking about, leave us alone. And I mean, I've heard the stories, and unfortunately we can't often really talk about them publicly because they've been told to us in confidence or whatever. But if staff members just really not behaving, and again, I'm not talking about one person who's told me stories like this. I'm talking about multiple people who've told me stories like this over multiple decades now, of how staff intransigence prevents things from happening, and how and I've seen it with my own eyes that even moderate change kicks up a torrent, a tidal wave of resistance and reasons why, no, we can't do it because we can't do it because we can't do it because. The classic case is like, okay, we've got these damn coyotes, we don't really want to do anything about it. Wow, that's the public's problem, get off our back. And now you've got a huge mess on your hands. And a huge mess is what Burlington really just does better than any other city. Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe not the colossal kind of vileness that you see in some other cities, and I'm looking at you, Brampton, I'm looking at you, Hamilton, but it's certainly pretty bad. And at a kind of Burlington level, it's really been destructive and unhelpful for a long time. So that's my kind of micro look at a macro problem.
You know what? On the note of needing to change council culture, why don't we take a break there? Because I think that'll give a good segue into our next topic after the break. Okay, folks, and we're back, and we go deep into the Hamilton election with a former guest of the podcast, Justin Chandler, wrote in on TVO.org an article on Hamilton politics called "What Happens When an Activist Runs for Office," and he focused on four uh, candidates running in various wards across Hamilton. Anthony Frisina, Cameron Crutch, who we've had on the podcast before, Kojo Damptey, and Linda Lukasik, who are all, I guess, in their respective capacities, kind of an activist for various causes. Not all the same cause. Like it's a kind of a plethora around a variety of issues. But they've all decided, no, we're throwing our hats in the ring, and we're going to take a shot at a city council.
Yeah, and the article sort of asks the question, is it doesn't use this phrase, but if I could sum it up, it's kind of implying, do activists, people who've been activists for a cause, who become councillors, face sort of additional challenges of balancing the compromises that you have to make in politics to get anything done with, for instance, Cameron Crutch. I don't think I'm saying anything out of turn here. He's been very outspoken on all kinds of issues. Does Cameron Crutch, the councillor who has to A, work with other councillors to get things done, and B, if he loses a vote, is then definitely meant to support the decision that's made, even if you voted against it, which I think is kind of a crazy situation, but that is the situation that exists. Does being an activist, is it almost a problem in a candidate? And personally, my answer would be no.
My question's always been, why aren't more activists running for political office? And there's some are good, some are bad, but it's one of those things. There's something to be said about kind of being on the outside looking in for a while, and after a while, you just gotta after banging your head against the door, so to speak, sometimes you just gotta kick the door open and say, okay, screw it, I'm taking over now. I'm getting the job done, and I'm moving it. And I find interesting, I mentioned this before we hit record, was the diversity, not just the diversity of the fields that they're active in. When you get to a city council, when you get to any kind of what's supposed to be a collaborative environment like city council, it's supposed to be collaborative. Where that intersectionality is going to come into play, how are those relationships going to work? Where, okay, so they might have a bit of an agenda, but you have 4 years to kind of put that agenda out, and you're going to. I've always found that you and I have always said, nothing happens in a silo. Everything is interconnected. Everything, it has an effect on something else, and when you get that intersectionality happening, whether it's anti-Black racism, LGBTQ rights, accessibility issues, or the environment, that to me is that I'm eager to see how that might work. I mean, I'm not for closing or foreshadowing that these individuals are going to be elected. I have no idea what's going to happen, but I find that's exciting. Is what happens when you get that intersectionality of people say, what can we do if my interest is in the environment and your interest is in anti-Black racism? What would happen there? What's that compromise going to look like to move some kind of policy ahead?
And the fact is, we want diverse councils, diverse in all senses of the word. We don't want councils, as they have historically been made up of middle-class white men. That was not a good situation. I mean, it was a deeply, deeply not good situation. We want people who come from backgrounds who, and certainly, if I'm casting a vote at a municipal level for anybody, I'm not going to cast my vote for someone who does not have a track record. I don't care if you've, the kind of thing. I've lived in Hamilton all my life. I could not care less where you've lived. Don't care. I mean, sure, I want to know that you know a bit about Hamilton and that you've got a history of kind of reasonable judgment. But I mean, I want to see what you're passionate about. And any activist who's, we all know, well, you and I both know that candidates for political office, people who want to become candidates in the future, will often get themselves on committees as resume building. They'll get into the board of the YMCA or the board of the hospital. And there's no guarantee, let me tell you, that person has actually done diddly squat for those organizations. However, I mean, you can tell with, for instance, we're not going to endorse any candidates on this podcast or anything like that, but I think we can go as far as saying, these are candidates that, if you lived in those wars, are definitely worth paying attention to, because they have achieved things before, and things of actual significance in organizations of significance. Mm-hmm. Doesn't mean you're going to be a good counselor. It doesn't necessarily follow, but it means that you're worth taking a look at. If all someone can say is, well, I've lived here all my life, end of sentence, go away.
Have you made a difference? But yeah. What I know where you were hinting on that comment, and so I'm going to kind of maybe broaden on it. But I get the sense we'd assumed that the selection in Hamilton would be a change election, that we thought there would be a wave of candidates who were saying enough is enough. We're going to battle with the old guard, the previous council, and we're going to go in and start, and we're going to have to wrestle control away from them to give to a more progressive view of the city. And we're anticipating a kind of a real, this is going to be a real policy fight over the kind of the direction of the city. That didn't happen because the old guard basically just said, okay, forget this, I'm going home, and they just walked away. So we thought, okay, well, we did. We thought, okay, that there's no fight in Hamilton anymore. Nobody's going to care. I'm glad to see that spirit didn't leave Hamilton this time around. These candidates are still advocating for their respective communities. They're not shying away from the expertise that they're going to rely on to get them elected. And I get the sense that they're also saying, but there's also a lot of stuff that I don't know, and my experience has taught me that I need to rely on people to help me get through it. And I'm rambling here, so bear with me. But that sense of change is still there. And where I find interesting is when you look at the mayoral election, that's where the fight's starting to materialize. Is that we saw it in the Cable 14 debate, where it's very clear Andrea Horwath was running on the slate on the idea of, I've been here since God knows when. I am Hamilton. Give me the job. And whereas Keenan Loomis was, he's like, I haven't been here for a while. I want the top job, not because I think I deserve it, but because I've got some ideas that I'm interested in. You may not like those ideas, and that's your right. But I get the sense from he's not doing it because I don't know what else to do with my time. He said, I got some ideas on how I would like to see the city improve. Give me 4 years and see if I make it happen. If I don't, you vote him out again. But I think that's kind of a refreshing viewpoint to have, not just in him, but kind of in a lot of these would-be counselors, to say, give us the reins of power. Let's see what we can do for 4 years.
Yeah, and actually, I wasn't talking about I've lived here all my life thing. I wasn't taking a deliberate dig at Andrew.
I don't live in Hamilton.
Well, no, yeah, I get that. But I mean, she said it. I mean, I was bringing it up because it's a cliche that is said by hundreds of candidates in hundreds of municipal elections, every election. It's said in provincial level, it's said at federal level. It's such a massive cliche, and it means nothing. And in Andrea's case, I have to say, it's like, Keenan Loomis might not have been here for decades, but in terms of the organizations he's been involved, I mean, it just doesn't. It's a bad argument. This isn't an endorsement of Keenan Loomis. It's just saying that Andrea's argument there is a bad argument not to vote for Keenan Loomis. Find better reasons not to vote for him, and tell me those, and then I'll listen. we expect more of Andrea Horwath as a leader of the NDP, as someone who, of prolonged and extensive electoral success, who took the NDP from perennial third place finishers to currently perennial second place finishers. Maybe not perennial, but they're in second place right now for the second time. She did that. That's something. That's a big deal. So don't give us "I've lived in Hamilton all my life" stuff. Everybody knows you've been working in Toronto for the last decade and a half. It's like we didn't come down with the last fall of rain. So that's just all a bit disappointing. Getting away from that, I think the best news is, there was an article in the Spec today, and actually this is a good reason to challenge that article. I think it was in the Spec today anyway, or it wasn't today, it was yesterday. Kind of saying that the Hamilton election is boring. And it's like, I don't think it's maybe not hasn't come alive to quite the extent we maybe thought it would. Mm-hmm. Like if Fred Eisenberger had not stood down, if Terry Whitehead had not stood down, if Sam Marula had not stepped down, it would be a different election. And the fact that they're all gone, particularly the two councillors, mm-hmm. is, hooray, hurrah! Hamilton can hopefully have some maturity in its next council. And I'm not going to paint Fred Eisenberg with the same brush. It's not fair, but this wasn't a council that covered itself in glory. Let's put it in the most kind way we can. So the fact that they were gone means it has changed the election, but I don't think it's boring. And I think that, I think the TVO article does highlight is there are some really good candidates out there. I'm not saying that those four are the only ones you should be looking at. Definitely not saying that. Go and check out all your candidates if you live in Hamilton. Look at their resumes. If the first thing they say is "I've lived in Hamilton all my life," please roll your eyes with an exaggerated effect. And if you ever get to speak to them, say, "Really? Really?" Let's kill that cliche dead in 4 years' time.
But I think what's interesting is that with the old guard just kind of giving up and going home, it's refreshing because we're actually starting to get ideas. I'll be honest, I'm a little surprised that I'm saying this. I thought that, oh my God, we're not going to have a debate on ideas or vision for the city, because I thought there's going to be no foil to put those up against. You're not going to have you don't have to present to your Marullo supporters or your Whitehead supporters or any of those people say, well, I need to convince you these ideas are better. Because they stepped away, it actually, like, we don't have to worry about convincing people that why those candidates were a bad choice to begin with. Like, we don't have to go through rehash the bad history there. We can now go to, okay, it's a free market, it's an open market now of ideas. Who's got the best ideas for the ward, for the city? And that's what we're seeing. It's refreshing to see. Like, we're actually getting some interesting ideas and some interesting choices coming to the table. And I'm pleasantly surprised I'll be honest, I'm pleasantly surprised to be proven wrong in this case, that Hamilton is still an exciting race to watch.
I definitely don't think it's fair to say it's a boring election. I definitely don't think that's fair. No. I don't think it's particularly helpful with the Spec to kind of drive down interest in that way. And I'm willing to say when an election is boring. This year in Burlington, I would say, is really boring. There's no, with all due respect to the candidates running against Marianne Mead Ward, you ain't going to win. I'm sorry. It's that simple. You ain't going to win. Just the way it is. She's going to win by 100 million miles. The candidates who are running against the incumbents in other wards, I have not really seen anity who has grabbed my attention as deserving.
We haven't probably seen that in any real race.
I've seen a whole bunch of nastiness that is. I just think it's garbage. I'm not even going to talk about it because it's garbage. I'm saying
beyond Burlington, like in the 905, like hell, previous episode we went to Brampton. or Brampton, because I can't even spell the name of the city she's trying to be mayor for. Like, I'm sorry, like that's what we're talking about. Like nobody like.
I think Milton. We'll come back to Milton. I think that the mayoral race there is really interesting, or should be really interesting. Everybody in Milton should be interested in that race, because the contrast between Zihan Hamid and Gord Krantz could not be greater. I mean, they are. Here's this young guy who's done incredible things when I say young guy, he's probably, I don't know how old he is, young compared with Gord, let's put it that way. Who's done, achieved all kinds of things in a few years. Gord has achieved, the longest career in politics known to humankind. I mean, that's something that deserves recognition. But, that really is a vote for, where should Milton be going now? Do we choose to look towards the future, or are we just happy to be a sprawling suburb forevermore? I think that's kind of the decision that's going on. So that one's interesting. Mississauga is a snooze fest. Brampton is bleh. It's interesting, but not for good reasons. It's interesting because of how horrible it is. And I think Vaughan is one that definitely it'd be really interesting to see what happens in Vaughan. And I don't know. I don't have a clue, but I'm not sure it's a slam dunk for a certain former leader of the Liberals.
Yeah, who knows? We'll keep an eye on it and see how it unfolds. I find Hamilton still continues to surprise me. I like to see, kind of going back to the article about activists, right? I like that these 4 people said enough's enough. I'm running. Whether they win or lose, kudos to them for putting their names forward and saying, I want to make my city, my community a better place. And I hope more people like them in the future choose to step up to the plate like this and put their names forward, because we need bold ideas, and not just at in our cities, but we need bold ideas all over. We have I just find that I'm tired of the same old. I want to see some bold ideas and big changes coming to really shape up this country, this region, this province for the challenges that we have. Because I just hoping the private sector is going to come in and solve it ain't going to happen, people. We have big problems. We need big solutions to fix them.
And just sort of returning to the TVO's point, which was to kind of question whether activists are a good fit for council roles, with again a kind of resounding yes, because these people have been involved in usually volunteer positions for long periods and causes they are passionate about. And if there's one thing I want in a councillor, it's a passion for the community and not a passion for their career, but a passion for getting things done for the community. And I see far too many people who, when you ask them why they're running, can't give you a good answer other than that they want to run. They usually don't get anywhere, thankfully, because they're not the smartest, kids on the block or whatever. But you've seen it, I've seen it. It's like the ambition is so obvious. They start running for politics at the age of 6. They start wearing the politician's suit before they're out of school. And yet there's no there, there's no, it's like, why are you running? Okay, right. Clearly you want to be a politician, fine, but why are you running? And, a kind of look of panic crosses their eyes. So I'll take an activist who was there before they even thought about going into politics over that any day of the week.
And on that, let's leave it there for this week. Thanks very much, everyone, for listening, and we'll be back on Tuesday. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
That's it for this episode of the 905er. Thank you for listening. As always, you can send us your feedback, thoughts, and concerns or ideas for future episodes to our email, info@905er.ca. We love to hear from you. You can help us keep the 905er going by financially supporting us through Patreon as well as PayPal. Visit us at 905er.ca and click on the support tab. As well, links are in the show notes for your convenience. Lastly, you can find us on social media. Search for _905er on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So long for now. See you next time.
Looking to make the most out of this life and optimize your personal wellness? Then check out the Natural Man Podcast. Join me, host Mike C., as we explore all areas of human wellness, physical, mental, and emotional. Learn strategies to optimize your own well-being and be in the driver's seat of your own health. Remember, your doctor works for you. Learn biohacks, neurohacks, ways to improve sleep, and ways to optimize your body and your mind. Check us out on Apple, Spotify, the Fountain app, and at naturalmanpodcast.com.